Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of déjà vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump business organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Our quote for the day from Fred Hampton, who was born on this day in 1948. Molly Ivins, it's her birthday too, by the way. But here's Fred Hampton's quote. He said, "Nothing is more important than stopping fascism, because fascism will stop us all." Boy, he was prescient. the Revolutionary Black Panther Party for Self-Defense chairman, Fred Hampton, who was murdered in his bed, as I recall. Anyway, by Chicago police, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah, Chicago police. Thank you very much. The racism that is pouring out of the Republican Party is, and the people that Donald Trump and these other white bigots and racists who have taken over the Republican Party, and they've always they've been part of the Republican Party. I was going to say always. They've been part of the Republican Party since 1965 in a big way, and of course they've been part of our both political parties arguably forever. But in 65, that was 64 and 65 were the years when the Civil Rights Act in 64, the Voting Rights Act in 65 were signed into law by Lyndon Johnson, and the Democratic Party officially renounced racism, essentially, as its primary shtick, particularly in the South. And Richard Nixon said, "Cool, and the election of '68's coming up, and I'm going to be running. We will take those people." And so the white racists became Republicans in the mid and late '60s, and the Republican Party is certainly living up to this. And this is very, very troubling. I mean, you get Ron DeSantis, for example, right? The guy who is going to be running against Andrew Gillum in Florida for governor of that state. Andrew Gillum is black. DeSantis is a white Tea Party Republican, apparently a racist, Islamophobe, and conspiracy nut. If you take the fact that he was running a Facebook group that is all those things, he resigned yesterday. I'm no longer with that Facebook group. Yeah, right. But Pam Geller still is. It's got 95,000 members. They regularly have posts. This is from Think Progress, people by Elam Khatami. They regularly have posts there slamming the Parkland shooting survivors, disparaging Black Lives Matter activists, comparing both to Hitler. They call them the NFL players who kneel, overpaid ball chasers who kneel like ISIS. They've made bigoted statements about Muslims, referring to Islam as a religion of pedophilia, sex slavery, rape gangs, and honor killings. One of them, this bizarre anti-Semitic and anti-Islamic post, "President Trump eats bacon, just one more reason to elect him in 2020. And somebody replies saying, "Unlike the last guy, at least he isn't a Muslim mole." So, that's, Ron DeSantis and his whole, monkey thing. And then talking about his opponent. And then we get this in Iowa. And again, this is something that has been ginned up and cranked up by Fox So-Called News, promoting white supremacy and racism across the United States since the 1990s. And also by Trump and all the Trumpettes, which is this story about this young lady, Miss Tibbetts, who was murdered by a fellow who is apparently, and Molly Tibbetts, who was murdered by a fellow who's apparently an illegal immigrant. We haven't defined that yet, or a person here without documentation, or, illegal immigrant has come to seize the lexicon, just like right to work. It's one of these right-wing memes. But in any case, a reader in Des Moines, Iowa, to Starting Line, it's a website that's associated with the Des Moines newspaper, got one of these robocalls, recorded this thing. Apparently it got recorded on their voicemail, and sent it into the newspaper. The newspaper has published it, and under the headline, "Neo-Nazi Robocall Hits Iowa on Tibbetts Murder. Kill Them All." And, this is the bizarre kind of racialized politics that might have been standard fare in the United States in the 1840s, but it, really should have no place in this country today. This is the kind of stuff that the Nazis were promoting in the 1930s, talking about Jews. Now they're talking about Hispanics. And this is from that robocall. This is what people were hearing across Iowa. And as far as we can tell, this may well be going national.
The body of 20-year-old Molly Tibbetts was found in a cornfield after she was stabbed to death by an invader from Mexico.
An invader from Mexico. Oh, my God, the brown people are coming. You know, we're not hearing much about invaders from Europe, all right? Here it continues.
Biological hybrid of white and his savage Aztec ancestors who also killed with knives during their mass human sacrifices on top of pyramids they didn't build. Some relatives of Molly Tibbet.
Right, the savage Aztecs who had an advanced civilization. I mean, you could argue it was more advanced than some European civilizations. And what, they didn't build the pyramids? Oh, well, they couldn't have been smart enough to do that. Must have been space aliens, right? These guys are nuts.
Started implying that despite having been murdered by a non-white savage intruder, she would still support the invasion of America by a brown horde, currently at a staggering 58 million. But you know...
See, there's that brown horde, and this is the whole, oh my God, America is going to become majority minority. Wait a minute. White people are the worldwide minority. We're right now a majority minority country. The majority is white, and that's a minority worldwide. We're going to become a majority country, but it's going to be, quite some time. But that doesn't, stop these guys from just panicking. Oh my God. And people, regardless of race, people can hold to the values of the United States. I mean, this bizarre idea that because somebody's skin color is different or they came from a different country that they can't hold to the liberal values of the Enlightenment that animated the creation and the constant progress of the United States is terrible. Anyhow, he continues.
In your heart, they are wrong. If after her life has now been brutally stolen from her, she could be brought back to life for just one moment and asked, what do you think now? Molly Tibbetts would say,
kill them all.
Molly Tibbetts would say, kill them all, right? Oh, yeah, that's what we need to do, kill them all. The fact of the matter is Molly Tibbetts' family is out there saying, quit trying to politicize the death of our daughter, sister, mother, or whatever she, I guess a daughter and sister. No, they're saying. This is not what Molly Tibbetts would say. And stop saying that, right-wing Republicans. Stop saying that Fox so-called news. Stop saying that right-wing hate radio. And obviously stop saying that to these Nazi robocallers in Iowa. It continues.
Well, we don't have to kill them all, but we do have to deport them all. The Aztec hybrids, known as mestizos, are low IQ, bottom-feeding savages, and is why the countries they infest are crime-ridden failures.
See, this is the exact same language, or very similar language, that was being used against a whole variety of people of color over the years, against Chinese in the 1880s, against African Americans throughout the history of this country. And it is vile. It is poison. But he makes the point, we've got to deport them all. And now, I mean, check this out. This story, this is from the Washington Post this morning. The U.S. is denying passports to Americans along the border, throwing their citizenship into question. They tell the story. This is by Kevin Seif of the Washington Post. His official American birth certificate shows he was delivered by a midwife in Brownsville, Texas. He spent his entire life wearing American uniforms, 3 years as a private in the Army, then as a cadet in the Border Patrol, and now as a state prison guard. But when Juan, 40, applied to renew his U.S. passport, he had a U.S. passport. The government's response floored him. In a letter, the State Department said they didn't believe he was an American citizen. The Trump administration is accusing hundreds, possibly thousands of Hispanics along the border of using fraudulent birth certificates since they were babies and is undertaking a widespread crackdown. Cases identified by the Washington Post, interviews with immigration attorneys suggest a dramatic shift in both passport issuance and immigration enforcement. In some cases, passport applicants with official U.S. birth certificates are being jailed in immigration detention centers and entered into deportation proceedings. In others, they are stuck in Mexico. Their passports suddenly revoked when they try to re-enter the United States. Their crime, they have Hispanic last names and their skin is darker than mine. That's what's going on. This is Trump's America. On top of that, now they're going after people who who were not eligible to vote and mistakenly voted, which is, probably 50 to 100 people a year in the United States. This is not any kind of effort to swing elections. This is people, in fact, the U.S. Attorney's Manual says, by and large, these kinds of cases are people who simply didn't know that if you have a green card, for example, you can't vote. You have to be a fully naturalized citizen. They just didn't know. And so, for example, this is, this story from the Huffington Post today, the headline, legal U.S. immigrants, legal, people who are here with government certification, with papers, face prison and deportation for voting. They tell the story of Denzelo Allen Page, is a 66-year-old Walmart worker in Raleigh. She helped her boyfriend register to vote in 2016. She said he was a legal permanent resident, and she wasn't sure if he was eligible to vote or not. So when they filled out the voting application, she did not check the box saying he was a U.S. citizen. And she said she left the box blank, figuring that the North Carolina State Board of Elections and Ethics Enforcement would let her know whether or not he was eligible. She said she had served as a poll worker before. She thought someone would flag the application and send her to a separate table to inquire about her boyfriend's citizenship status. She did this in person at a voting place. And when she asked if her boyfriend could vote, the poll worker said sure and took the form. So she thought everything was okay. On Friday, federal prosecutors announced that she had been indicted for aiding and abetting her boyfriend's false claim of citizenship. If convicted, she faces 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. This is happening all over the country now, but particularly in red states, where they are imprisoning people for registering to vote. Any idea why they might want to do that? This is, all racism all the time. It's turtles all the way down.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Actually, the turtles metaphor was kind of nice. This is racists all the way down. 18 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. It's going to take me just a minute to get my call screen software up here. Here we go. All righty. So let's pick up some of your phone calls. Jude in Birmingham, Alabama. Hey, Jude, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hi, I was just calling to ask you if you consider the possibility that Donald Trump might be the biblical Antichrist.
The biblical Antichrist is, by most biblical scholars, is believed to have been one of the Roman emperors who was alive at the time that was written.
Well, I would just. There's a man named Brother James Key on YouTube that puts up a very strong argument in videos.
Yeah.
That by what he's been doing.
I remember, when Hal Lindsey published The Late Great Planet Earth, which I read back in the 70s, and then Reagan came along, and everybody was flipped out. The number of the beast is 6, 6, and 6. There's 6 letters in Ronald, 6 letters in Wilson, 6 letters in Reagan. Reagan's old home address was 666, whatever the street name was. They changed that when he became president. And the quote whore, the harlot or whatever, the woman who was supposed to be the collaborator with the beast, had the mark of the beast on her forehead, the horn, and so they thought that was Gorbachev. I mean, everybody was quite hysterical about that. What's the argument being made that Trump is the Antichrist?
His heritage. He makes about his heritage, about where he lives, about how his building has been built, basically on the number 666. That it's.
Well, Jared Kushner owns 666 Fifth Avenue, but he's not Trump.
No, but I'm talking about the Trump Tower in New York. Mm-hmm. The way it was designed and built is built based on the number 6.
Okay.
And you could look up what the man says about it. You might be very interested, I would think.
Yeah. Apparently it's caused you to think that it's possible. What do you think will happen if Trump is the biblical Antichrist?
Well, I'm just waiting for some sort of natural disaster or unnatural disaster like you talked about, maybe that disease that kills 40% of the people, and he can maintain power that way in the United States and go on beyond.
Yeah. Well, the Republicans certainly know how to exploit tragedy. I mean, look at 9/11. George W. Bush took 9/11. He had a very unpopular presidency. He was viewed as an illegitimate president. He did not win in Florida. We learned that a year after the election when the New York Times finally counted the votes. And 9/11 happened, and suddenly he went from, being in the tank, popularity-wise, to up to the 90%. And thanks a lot for the call, by the way, Jude. And took that and turned it into hey, let's make America a police state. Let's start surveilling everybody. I mean, some of those abuses have been pulled back and dialed back largely as a result of Edward Snowden outing what was going on, but a lot of them are still in place. The woman who's now running the CIA destroyed the videotapes of the CIA torture programs. The violent, illegal, internationally criminal torture sessions. Destroyed the evidence. So, it wouldn't surprise me at all if there was a major disaster. Whether it was a pandemic or whether it was another 9/11 kind of thing. That Trump would use to flip America into a fascist state. Keep in mind, Hitler used the burning of the Parliament building, the Reichstag. He used the burning of the Parliament building to impose his emergency decrees. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who, pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Thom Hartmann. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And the legal U.S. immigrants facing prison, 5 years in prison for voting. This is, and then on top of this, we've got the prison strike going on in the United States right now. In fact, it's spread to Canada. It's going on in Nova Scotia as well. But in the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma, Washington, 200 detained immigrants joined the nationwide protest. Kevin Rashid Johnson in Waverly, Virginia, writes in The Guardian that slave labor still exists in the United States in 2018. In fact, slavery never ended in this country. Now, a lot of people hear that and they think, oh, that's hyperbole, Are you kidding? Really? I thought that slavery got ended by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Well, no, actually. The 13th Amendment says that slavery can still exist in the United States. You just have to be convicted of a crime. It's not that punishment can exist in the United States. It's not that imprisonment can exist in the United States. It's slavery can exist in the United States. Let me read you the 13th Amendment, which actually says this. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So neither slavery nor imprisonment can be a punishment, shall exist in the United States except as punishment for a crime. Slavery can be punishment for a crime. And that's exactly what's going on. People are being forced to work in slave labor-like conditions in prisons all over the United States, all over the, and in some in Canada as well. This is something that the Northern European countries have almost completely abandoned, with an emphasis on rehabilitation. But here in the United States, no. No, it's longer and longer and longer, and we're seeing this prison strike now. This was, triggered. It's a 19-day strike. We're more or less in the middle of it right now. It was triggered by April's rioting in the Lee Correction Institution in South Carolina, in which 7 inmates were killed. Yes, a lot of inmates are being killed. And for example, just in the last 3 weeks, in Mississippi, 10 inmates have died in their cells. No explanation of why. And of course, the vast majority of these people are people of color. Or actually, I'm not sure if it's the vast majority, but it's certainly in the neighborhood of half of our prison population. It depends on the state you're in, obviously. But this is what's going on. It's all racism all the time, and Donald Trump thinks, and Ron DeSantis and the other racist Republicans think they can coast this stuff to electoral victory.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Do you think it's going to work for them? We'll pick up your calls after this. It's 28 minutes past the hour. Today we're reading from The Quantum Revelation by Paul Levy. This is from the introduction. For the last few years, all I've wanted to do is read about quantum physics. I've been studying quantum physics on and off for decades, but have never gone as far down the rabbit hole as I have this time. It feels like I've gone through the looking glass to the point of no return. The more I contemplate what quantum physics is telling us, the more my mind gets blown into phantasmal traces of non-existent subatomic particles. Studying quantum theory is like ingesting a mind-altering time-release psychedelic that keeps coming on with a greater intensity the more I wrap my mind around what this world-changing revolutionary theory is telling us about the nature of reality. Taking in what quantum physics is revealing to us about our universe is psycho-activating beyond belief, in that it activates the psyche, inspires the imagination, and synchronistically dissolves the boundary between mind and matter. To say that quantum physics is the greatest scientific discovery of all time is no exaggeration. Its profound revelations and implications cannot be overstated. We literally have to create a new form of language, not to mention a new way to think, to do it justice. In discovering the quantum, physics has indisputably encountered consciousness. There's simply no denying this fact. The highly respected mathematical physicist John von Neumann said as early as 1932 that consciousness exists in and has entered the equations of quantum mechanics, yet no one knows exactly where to find it. Quantum theory demands a radical revisioning of the role that consciousness plays in the deep structure and ongoing unfolding of reality. Quantum physics unequivocally points out that the study of the universe and the study of consciousness are inseparably linked, and that ultimate progress in the one will be impossible without progress in the other. The change that began with the discovery of the quantum reality wasn't solely a transformation of the worldview of science, but is potentially an expression of and vehicle for the evolutionary mutation of human consciousness itself. To create context for its discovery, at the beginning of the 20th century, the prevailing opinion among many physicists was that there was nothing new to be discovered in physics except for more precise measurements. A unique development in human history, the discovery of the quantum nature of our universe, has brought about a seismic, tectonic shift in the very foundation of physics and the roots of our scientific worldview. The change in the concept of reality emerging in quantum theory is not simply a continuation of the past, but rather a radical break with it. The gap between the new version of reality, the quantum reality reveals, and our old habitual ways of thinking about reality are wider than the abyss of the Grand Canyon, the two sides of which are at least on the same level. With the emergence of quantum physics, we are encountering an entirely new universe that is of a totally different order than the one we've been used to. Quantum physics heralds a change so momentous that it can, and already has, transformed the course of world history. The discovery of the quantum has inaugurated what Niels Bohr conceived of as the beginning of a new epoch. This great change is already underway, And yet there remains a long way to go for the full transformational impact of the discoveries of quantum physics to be assimilated by humanity, i.e. for its insights to transform the nature of the collective common sense of human beings. All great theories spend a long time gestating and being born. It can be dangerous to understand new things too quickly. We find ourselves in the role of midwives, helping to birth a quantum understanding of the world. What quantum physics is revealing to us is so radical, with implications so far-reaching, that to call it merely revolutionary would not do it justice. The conceptual revolution of quantum theory has literally turned physics on its head. What it is revealing about our universe is turning right side up what had been inverted and upside down regarding our understanding of the nature of reality. The advent of quantum physics can be thought of as a revolution in the realm of ideas. Quantum physics is introducing us to a radically new way of seeing, conceptualizing, and understanding that profoundly impacts human thinking, feeling, sensing, knowing, and being. As if the universe itself were giving us a cosmic physics lesson, what quantum physics is revealing to us requires a completely new way of picturing and thinking about the universe, our place in it, and as well as who we are. Quantum theory is teaching us that implicit in our very thinking are certain flaws and misperceptions that, unseen and taken for granted, unnecessarily constrain and limit our ability to apprehend the nature of nature, including our own. The founders of quantum physics, sometimes referred to as genius physicists, people like Max Planck, Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Wolfgang Pauli, and Erwin Schrödinger, famously argued that quantum physics is first and foremost a new way of thinking. Indeed, the most far-reaching impact of that uniquely 20th century mode of thought, quantum physics, will be found within the human mind. The discoveries of quantum physics require a novel response in us, which, when are more fully understood and integrated, will irrevocably change us, both individually and as a species, in the very core of our being. Regarding the implications of quantum physics, John Bell, one of the most important physicists of the latter half of the 20th century, is of the opinion that, quote, the new way of seeing things will involve an imaginative leap that will astonish us, end of quote. The book, The Quantum Revelation, by Paul Levy. It's a once-in-a-lifetime luxury Alaskan cruise on the Regent 7th Sea Mariner, July 24th, 2019. For more information, Keen Luxury Travel, 800-856-1155. And did I mention, we'll be getting active on board with special events with yours truly me as we visit Ketchikan, Juneau, Skagway, Sitka, Hubbard Glacier, and Anchorage. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Is racism the card that's going to continue to work for the Republican Party? I started to say that's going to work for them, but it's what they've been using since Richard Nixon's Southern strategy. Racism, Ronald Reagan, the first speech he gave after he was nominated to be president of the United States by the Republican Party at the Republican National Convention, the first speech he gave was in Philadelphia, Mississippi, the town right down the road from the nearest town to where Cheney, Schwermer, and Goodman, were the three civil rights workers, were brutally murdered, and their bodies hidden for some time there. Back in the 1960s, that's where Reagan went to give a speech on states' rights. That's also where Donald Trump Jr. went to give his first speech as the surrogate for his father. He also went to Philadelphia, Mississippi. I mean, this is an old race card that these Republicans have been playing. And they've gone from the dog whistle days of, with Paul Manafort and Lee Atwater back in the 70s and back in the 80s and during the Reagan era, when Lee Atwater was saying, well, you can't use the N-word anymore and you can't talk about race. And, we used to talk about forced busing. Everybody knew what we were talking about. And now you can just say tax cuts and everybody gets it. That's going to hurt poor people and black people disproportionately. And so you don't. But now they've said, we don't need to be that subtle. We'll just talk about monkeys. Right. So is this going to work? We'll see. We will see. Kevin in Kelseyville, California. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Hey, Tom. Oh, you're welcome. It's a great show. I enjoy it. I just want to mention that the 13th Amendment is something that I write about online quite a bit, and invariably somebody will respond back and say, we have to have the the slavery clause in the 13th Amendment, because if we don't, then we couldn't force the prisoners to even clean up after themselves. It's ludicrous. And I've never been able to get anybody to respond further than that. Like, you know, if somebody's in prison and you're telling me that we can't make them clean up after themselves without making them a slave, there's a problem that needs to be addressed. Yeah,
it's also a logical fallacy. I mean, you know, if somebody's in prison, and you know, the 13th Amendment. I mean, I would love to go back if I had a time machine and go back and talk to the people who wrote this thing, because it almost looks like they were anticipating Jim Crow, that they were anticipating the disenfranchisement of African Americans. We only had about a decade of radical Republicans running the show there after the Civil War, and then boom, the backlash came, and you know, the favorite practice of you know, white people in the South to deal with black people who were asking for their rights or who might even want to run for public office or might want to vote was to put them in jail.
Absolutely.
And then, you know, run these work farms, these work camps.
Well, and right along that point, I just wanted to make one other point regarding this topic, and that is that, well, and maybe two, but kind of rolled into one, and that is that without the slavery clause in the 13th Amendment, we wouldn't have private prisons. The reason we have private prisons is because they are allowed to utilize slave labor. They pay their people 25 cents an hour or whatever it is. These people are making products that are sold in the marketplace. If you go to Google and you type in prison-made goods sold in the USA and start reading, it will blow your mind. It's a multi-billion-dollar per year industry. Yep. And they are not just working in the prisons, and they are making products that are sold in the marketplace, retail products.
Right.
And it is an outrage. And it has got to be stopped. Yeah,
for a wide variety of companies whose names you would recognize. You're absolutely right. Kevin, thank you for the call. That's very, very well said. Steve in Chicago. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind?
Yes, I wanted to make the point that at the same time that the right wing is being more and more overtly racist, that they're making this sort of other argument wherein, you know, it's the Democratic Party that has traditionally been the party of racism. You know, they want to cut out a nice little sliver of the pie historically and leave out that part that you mentioned earlier with regard to the Southern strategy and, you know, the fact that when Democrats abandon their history of racism, not entirely, obviously, but in terms of their platform and their party, the Republicans are more than willing to pick up those voters. And you know, but to hear it from people online like the Alex Jones of the world, you know, no, it's the Democrats who are the party that oppressed African Americans. So why in heaven's name are you voting for the Democrats? So if you're an African American, if you're Hispanic, right. You know, but again, it's distortion.
That was an argument that might have flown before 1965, and you know, there was a lot of truth to it, that the Democratic Party, which was founded by Thomas Jefferson, a slaveholder, was a party that historically, through the history of the United States, you know, up through and including the American Civil War, was a party that defended slavery, and was a party that was all in on Jim Crow, although the Republican Party was only anti-Jim Crow, anti-racism, anti-slavery for about 15 years. And, you know, from 1856 until, you know, maybe 1870. And that was the end of it, you know, and then both parties became the parties of white supremacy. And but, you know, in the South, the Democrats still, you know, because of the Democratic Party's affiliation with the Confederacy, the Democratic Party was still the racist party in the South up until 65. And when LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act in 64, he told Bill Moyers has told this story on the air many, many times. He turned to the people around him and he said, you know, or one of them said to LBJ, you sign that legislation and the Democratic Party, our party, is going to lose the South for a generation. And LBJ said, if that's the price of doing the right thing, I'm willing to pay it. And it turns out it wasn't a generation. Absolutely. It's been 3 or 4 generations now.
Oh, absolutely. And when you look at the vote itself, it was not along party line. It was along regional lines. The Southern Republicans and Democrats tended to have voted against the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s, all the civil rights legislation that was introduced, whereas in the North, you had Republicans and Democrats voting for it. So, when you find this kind of distortion out there, that's exactly the kind of disinformation that's being circulated that wants to, promote this idea.
Yeah, but they're still promoting it on Fox News. I mean, at least once a week, I'll get a call from somebody. I'll put somebody on the air that wants to talk about racism. And what does he want to talk about? Well, Robert Byrd, who was Hillary Clinton's mentor, was a notorious Klan member. And it's like, yeah, until the 60s. I mean, when he reformed and repented.
50 years of his life, he renounced that practice. So, I mean, Donald Trump has yet to apologize for what he did in terms of the Central Park Five. But Robert Byrd apologized and went on to champion civil rights. But Robert Byrd, knowing Hillary Clinton, is literally still a talking point on Fox so-called news and on right-wing hate radio. It's bizarre. Steve, thank you for the call. Very, very well said. Tony in Huntsville, Alabama. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind?
Tom, how you doing, buddy?
Good. What's up?
Listen, as a person who did 5 years in the prison system here in Alabama, I can tell you about the slavery thing firsthand. We go out there, we pick tomatoes, squash, okra. That stuff ends up in Kroger and Walmart. They pay us 25 cents an hour. They stand in the tower with the long 12-gauge shotgun trained on you while you work. During my tenure in prison, I saw 2 men get shot because you're working on the line and you have to use the bathroom. And if you're new and you think you can go to a tree or something and use the bathroom, they shoot you because you came from in between the imaginary lines that all the old guys know exist.
Wow.
But the new guys don't know. And they say, inmate, and everybody drops down. They just, boom, kill you right on the spot and bury you on the hill. Look, this thing is about money. The racism is going to work. Black people had Obama, so white people got Trump, and they're glad, and they're not going to relinquish the fact that we had Obama. We loved Obama. They loved Trump. It's always worked. It's always going to work. The problem is the private prison system is the key in Alabama. All they have in Alabama is agriculture and prison, and they want people of color to have so much time. I was watching MSNBC. They were talking about Paul Manafort's going to get 8 years. 8 years? Hell, I got a 20 for some dope. I mean, this man is colluding with Russians, and y'all going to give him, and he might get 8 years?
Well, not only that, the judge that was the judge in the Manafort case, Judge Ellis, he had previously had a guy come before him who was convicted of a $20 million tax fraud case. Manafort's was only $18 million, and he gave the guy 7 months in jail.
This is ridiculous. This is the craziest thing I ever heard in my life. This is why this stuff doesn't work, Tom, because an upscale white man gets nothing happens to him. He can do anything in the world. A black man sell a rock, and he's going to get no less than 20 years. He's hard labor. And Jefferson Sessions is the worst man in the world, Tom. He's one of the reasons that the people here in Alabama are suffering, because if you're a person of color, they're going to make sure you get the long haul so that these shareholders in these companies can make lots and lots and lots of money on you long term. We call it going up for parole. We call it going up for denial.
Right. Remarkable. Tony, thank you for sharing your story with us. I truly appreciate it. And this is such grim stuff. Here in the United States, we need to awaken from the horrors of this and reform our penal system, reform our criminal justice system, and fix the racism in this country.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We need to explicitly renounce the racism in this country. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Let's see here, Free Speech TV. Larry in Danbury, Connecticut, watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom. I enjoy your program a number of years now. I think we all, well, progressives, agree that the Trump separating the families at the borders was wrong morally. A number of courts, the Ninth Circuit, and a couple of other court decisions came down that overturned it.
Right.
So my question,
but there's still over 500 kids who are separated from their parents.
Right, and those were court decisions. Was it the Ninth Circuit, and there was some? I think there was a court in Arizona that also ruled against it.
Yeah.
Okay. So my question to you is this: his executive order. Okay, now his executive order was overturned by the courts by judicial review. So I know you're against judicial review, and I called once before about this, but I just want to hear your comments about why, in this case, judicial review was bad. I mean, it was good. So
I'm not opposed, unilaterally to judicial review. I think that the judiciary checking either of the other two branches, the legislative or the executive, is appropriate. My argument is that. And in fact, I've been, shall we say, rethinking this. If the court was to go back to the frequency of constitutional questions that they took on, that they had in the first 70 years of the United States. In the first 70 years, there were 3 cases in 70 years. And they turned out, the third one was Dred Scott, it turned out to be a disaster. But if they went back to that kind of frequency, I probably wouldn't be as freaked out about it. But instead, every single or virtually every single ruling that the Supreme Court is now doing is striking down laws, modifying laws, rewriting laws based on what they say is the Constitution. In these cases, these courts did not rule that Trump violated the Constitution. They ruled that he violated the law. And that's entirely appropriate judicial review.
Okay. All right.
So
I just understood from the past that you were against judicial review.
I think that I think that when the court overturns laws that have been passed by the legislature, by both branches of Congress, and have been signed by the president, when the court overturns those laws, it should do so very carefully, very thoughtfully, and with great deference to what the consequences might be. That's not to say that they shouldn't be able to do that. On the other hand, Congress could then pass a law, and this is Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. Congress could then pass a law saying, well, in fact, we're going to continue doing, and you can't stop us. I mean, Congress has that power. They've never exercised it, but they have that power. And so there are remedies for out-of-control judicial review. And the principal one that has been used is what FDR did in 1937. When he said to the Supreme Court, if you keep knocking down my child labor laws and right to unionize laws, if you keep knocking these things down, I'm going to change the composition of the court. And that's, again, Article 3, Section 2. That power is given to Congress and to the president. And FDR could have pulled it off. And the court changed as a result of that threat. There was not a single new person or an old, put on the court or an old person taken off. They just changed their behavior as a result of that threat. And but FDR was the last president, to the best of my knowledge, to really seriously take on the court. Larry, thanks for the call. A good point. And I'm working on a book on the Supreme Court right now. I'm really getting into this. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Rich?
Hi.
Hey, you're on the air.
I basically just want to say, let's give you a hint of my age, too. Howard Cosell, back in the 70s, got zapped hardcore for using the term monkey.
Right.
And this guy and any other person, whether they mean to or not, use a racist slur, should be hung by their ears.
Well, I don't know about hung by their ears, but they should be.
You know what I mean? They need to lose their job. They need to take the time to think. If they're in a public environment where they're using public statements and they're not thinking about what they're saying and they're saying things that offend people, they don't belong in the public environment, period.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they should be censured, essentially. They should be told, no, we really don't want to hear from you anymore. Rich, thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate the call. Kenyatta in Redlands, California. Hey, Kenyatta, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about the comment by, I believe his name is DeSantos in Florida.
Yeah.
I've been listening to that was a Freudian slip, right-wing radio this morning.
It's also white-wing.
No, but no, I didn't mean to do that. But they've talked about, was it innocuous? Did he really listen? It's always the wrong questions we ask in this country, which is why this cancer that is the history of black people in this country persists, because it's the wrong question. It's not it doesn't matter if he meant it, if it was racist, if it was dog whistle, if it was a trumpet. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the people like me that affected are people who have lived with a legacy of products that depict black people in very disparaging ways, with monkeys, with this type of thing. You may recall a comment about Michelle Obama, a gorilla in heels.
Yep.
There are no other racial groups that I know in this country that are compared to any type of animal or insect. So the question isn't what he meant. The question is that because of the ugly history of this country that white people are responsible for, specifically in terms of black people, whether they want to be or not, they are. That it's about how it affects me as a black person. It's not about what you meant. It doesn't matter what you meant. Who uses the term monkey up?
Right. I have frankly never heard that phrase, Kenya. The thing that shocked me was that DeSantis' response was not to say, geez, that was insensitive. I never should have used that phrase. It was something from my childhood. I heard my crazy uncle say it once, and I thought it was cool. It never occurred to me that it was racist. I mean, he could have made some semi-palatable excuses, at least an attempt to apologize. He didn't do any of that. He just essentially doubled down on it. Back to you, Kenyatta.
Well, I think that's very consistent with, again, the history of this country. Why is it that the United States admittedly says that slavery, quote unquote, was its original sin, yet it has never formally apologized for saying?
Yeah. I thought there was it merely an attempt to have a formal apology from Congress? This was just a decade or so ago, wasn't it? They didn't pass it?
No.
Oh my. I mean, I think that is because, you've got so many people, so many white people who are scared to death of reparations, which is a whole other conversation, but yeah.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, Tom. But I do appreciate, your feedback on this, for me at this point in time, jumping up and down about is it racist isn't the issue. The issue is what has happened to these people? And you can look at the history of black people in America that makes them so different. And if the society is responsible for that, then the society needs to be responsible for that and acknowledge it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that we have always in this country, and I don't think that this is unique to this country. I think it's part of the human condition at a certain level. There has always been this, to paraphrase the old Chris Christopherson song, everybody's got to have somebody to look down on, and
right.
The way that the Irish immigrants were treated in the 1840s through the 1860s, the way that the Italians immigrants were treated in the 1880s through the 1900s. These are stories that are well known to white people. The difference was that because they looked white, they were able to integrate into society, lose their accents, and basically just kind of vanish into the population. Whereas people who are visibly different, who have darker skin, don't have that luxury. I mean, that's part of white privilege.
I can't help but laugh at that.
Why?
Because whenever there's one of these, I'm with you. But whenever there's one of these police shootings, you hear the mantra of, that they're such, and I'm not disparaging police officers, but they're heroes and they put on the uniform every day. But you see, they can take that uniform off.
Right.
I can't take mine off.
Yeah, exactly, and it's this is the thing that so many white people don't get, and it's just, we got a lot of work to do. Kenyatta, thanks for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. I appreciate it. We'll be back with more. Let's see, do we have a guest? Oh yeah, Richard Wolff is coming up. Professor Richard Wolff is going to be with us. We're going to talk about the national debt and the prison strike, and whatever else is on his mind. And then, of course, we'll be back to picking up your phone calls. And I've got a pile of other news for you too, so stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat, The True Story of the White Nation by J. Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. The book Settlers.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Let's check in with Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, democracyatwork.info, and his their website, rdwolf.com, author most recently of Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. You can also tweet him at Prof. Wolff, Profwolff. Richard Wolff, Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
Great to have you with us. I had two large questions for you, and then, anything you wanted to rant about or talk about today, I'm up for. But the first is, we've got on the one side, on the classic Republican side, lots and lots of hysteria about the national debt. Even, when Ronald Reagan came into office, the national debt was about $800 billion. It wasn't even $1 trillion. And the Republicans were like, this is going to be the end of the republic. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the modern monetary theorists who are gaining some purchase in the mindset of American economists, who are saying that, the national debt is actually savings, by and large, in the private sector. It's if the federal government doesn't provide a safe place for people to put their savings, then you have a very unstable system, as we saw in the 1830s when Andrew Jackson paid off the national debt and produced the largest and deepest depression in the history of the United States. So what's the real story on the national debt, in your opinion, sir?
Well, you're quite right that the Republicans have made a career for many, many decades using, and I use that word intentionally, using the problem of a national debt as an excuse. They can't say honestly that they want to cut social programs for the mass of people out of an ideological commitment, which I believe is the truth. It sounds much better to be doing something that you can claim is for the good of everybody, and not having the government go too deeply into debt sounds terribly reasonable, and therefore is something that the Republicans and the conservatives in the Democratic Party, too, can wrap themselves up in, so they're doing good things when they are, in fact, cutting government spending on all kinds of social programs that people need. So, yes, it's been a phony issue all along. And so the Keynesians, the liberals in American politics, have usually come back and said, well, yeah, the deficit is a problem for a while, but it's an important problem to have because in the long run, we better spend the money that keeps our society together, that takes care of the people that the private sector neglects or forces to live below the poverty line, et cetera, and using government money for that, even if it's borrowed, is a worthwhile purpose and will, in the long run, be better for the economy than not doing it.
Well, and Keynes
usually like to point to the Great Depression as having been that kind of a situation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Keynes was also saying during times of economic slowdown, you raise the national debt to stimulate the economy. During times of rip-roaring prosperity, you pay down the national debt, right?
Exactly. My only quarrel, and I understand the technical issues of the modern monetary theory, they are quite right. Money is created by banks in the normal course of what they do. That, by the way, introduces as much instability, that fact, as it resolves. But I think they sometimes kind of go too far because, in effect, there's no way around it. If the government has to pay off massive debts, the way the government is going to have to do with the debts run up since the crash of 2008, it will, in fact, be pressing on people, individuals, and businesses to raise the money to pay back those loans. So for me, I always wonder in my mind, why? Basically, why is the government borrowing money? And here's the issue that I think people have to come to terms with. The government is right now borrowing at an enormous clip again. But there is no mystery why it is doing that. It has to do with the fact that last December, this Trump Republican government gave business an unbelievable tax cut, thereby depriving the government of an enormous amount of revenue. At the same time, they spent a little bit more because they didn't dare not do that in the face of this enormous gift to corporations and wealthy people. And the only reason the government has to borrow is because it gave that enormous tax cut to these wealthy people and to these already richer than ever corporations. If they hadn't have done that, then they wouldn't need to expand the deficit now. And here comes the clincher. Ask yourself the question, from whom is the government going to borrow all of this money that it needs to borrow because it's not taxing corporations and the rich? And the answer to the question is the corporations and the rich. The irony here is that the government is borrowing money from the people who have that money to lend because the same government isn't taxing them anymore. In effect, what the government here did was to say to corporations and the rich, you don't have to pay taxes. Instead, we're going to get the money from you in a different way. We're going to borrow it. We're going to pay you interest for the time that we borrow it. And then X years from now, we're going to give it all back to you. There's no then surprise that corporations and the rich love this arrangement, love to talk about it as stabilizing this or that, actually make use of the modern monetary theorists, even though those tend to be more on the left than on the right of our political spectrum, because in effect, running a deficit this way is an enormous gift to corporations and the rich.
That's remarkable. I mean, I'm curious what you think about Ellen Brown's suggestion that the Constitution specifically gives, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress the right to determine the value of money and to mint coins, and that while the Federal Reserve prints our paper money, the coins in your pocket, the quarters, nickels, and dimes, are actually Treasury Department. They're actually U.S. government money. And the government gets to say that, you know, that thing that you think is a quarter is worth $1/4 of a dollar, 25 cents. They could just as easily say it's worth $5,000 or $50,000. They can assign any value they want to it, and that the federal government could easily mint, say, 10 $1 trillion platinum coins, bring that $10 trillion into being by doing that, and then use those $10 trillion to redeem debt with the Fed, or redeem debt, I guess, with the Treasury Department, to pay off $10 trillion of the national debt. And the argument that she made of why this would not be inflationary or destructive to the country is that, for example, in 2008, the Fed created $27 trillion out of thin air and distributed it all over the world to billionaires and rich people. The quantitative easing has been something on the order of $6 or $7 trillion, I believe. I mean, you would know the numbers better than me, but it's been huge. And that these trillions of dollars going into the economy and coming back out of the economy are now, in this modern era, you know, not that large a chunk of money that they're going to debase the currency. What do you think about that? Or is that just a wild out there theory?
No, it's not wild at all. It's a recognition of a very simple reality, which is you only have an inflation if there's an imbalance between the amount of money in circulation looking to buy things in relationship to the amount of things that are there looking to be sold. If you manage it properly, you can always control the quantity of money so that it has the relationship to the things people use money to buy that keeps prices of each item roughly stable over periods of time. The problem is, who's going to do that? And the only logical thing would be for the government, an entity that at least theoretically represents all of us and what we need as a community. The government ought to do it. But private banks don't want that. They don't want to lose the very lucrative situation they have, that they can make money for themselves off of controlling the monetary system. They don't want to give that over to the government, even though for us as the mass of people, it is literally crazy to allow something so important for all of us as the money supply, the conditions of money in our economy, to be in the hands of people who are not there entrusted with what's good for all of us, but who are there pursuing their private profit. That's been the critique from day one of the absurd way that this is done. It's as if we didn't have the army in the hands of the government that theoretically represents us, but had lots of little armies looking to make money off of their arminess rather than serving the public purpose. We are now allowing the public purpose of the money we all rely on to be in the hands of people who tell you honestly when you ask them that their bottom line, their first priority, is the private profit of the bank and the lenders, etc., who control the money supply. There's the fundamental irrationality before you even get to the issue of the deficit.
Yeah. Remarkable stuff. We'll have to pick up our conversation about slavery next week or down the road.
All right.
But it's because we're out of time. But Professor Richard Wolff, it's always an honor and a pleasure to talk with you, sir. Thank you.
Same thing. Thank you very much.
Great having you with us. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolf and the website democracyatwork.info or rdwolf with 2fs.com. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It is 17 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. Stick around. And welcome back. Let's see here. Free Speech TV. Tammy in Spirit Lake, Iowa. Hey, Tammy, thank you for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Well, Tom, I just kind of wanted to keep you up to date since I'm here in Ground Zero in Steve King's district.
Oh, my.
Regarding the unfortunate death of Molly Tibbetts and the racism. Mm-hmm. Because another form of slavery is these undocumented workers are working in the dairies, the hog confinements, the chicken, confinements. I mean, there's thousands of animals jammed in these buildings, and that's where they're working. Mm. Not to mention the slaughterhouses. So it has kind of uncovered a dirty little secret of the underbelly of the giant agribusiness here in the state of Iowa. The gentleman upon whose farm that the guy was working is a huge Republican donor, with the Farm Bureau. So on one hand, they complain about the illegal status of these folks, as in Steve King, but on the other hand, they exploit them to work on their farms.
Right, and this is one of the reasons why they like this, and because they can threaten these folks with deportation, with exposure, and squeeze more work out of them. They can engage in wage theft. They can engage in assault, including sexual assault. They routinely get away with these kinds of things. And the solution obviously is to have a rational, comprehensive immigration policy. One solution. Another solution, of course, is to raise the wages so that we don't need to rely on immigrants to do every single job. But, nobody, certainly nobody in the Republican Party is willing to discuss either of those two things.
Well, that's true. And, of course, unfortunately, Steve King is using this to whip up racism here. It is so out of control now. It's like you can hardly even have a decent conversation with anyone because they're just so, it's the immigrants' fault. They're carrying disease and drugs. And, I mean, it's beyond comprehension that this is where we are in the new millennium. It's mind-boggling.
It's a true tragedy. You live in Iowa. I don't know where Spirit Lake is.
Steve King's district.
Yeah. Okay. Steve King used to actually come on this show. I used to debate him, but he stopped coming on because I think I was just regularly kicking his butt. But is he worse than he used to be?
It seems like with the election of Trump, racism is okay again.
Yeah.
What I'm finding, it's become okay, and it's just very disturbing. And so his brand of politics works.
At least in the Republican Party, and
yes.
And apparently in Iowa. Do you think there's any chance Iowa's going to flip blue in this election cycle?
You know, I think J.D. Scholten does have a real chance against Steve King. He's the first one that has a chance in a long time. If you have a chance to interview him, he's wonderful. And he's running on Medicaid for all, you know, but he's running on the liberal policies, you know, the ones who are sort of wishy-washy. I don't think they're going to make it, but that's just me.
Yeah,
and
that's my sense of it too. That if somebody's running as a real progressive, they will energize the progressive base, who will turn out and elect them. And you know, hopefully that's what's going to happen in Florida. I'd love to see that happen in Iowa. Tammy, thanks for the heads up and for the information and for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, you know, a couple times a year, and you know, that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who, you know, pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just, you know, click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. And the Thomas Friedman, he's published a couple of really good pieces recently. I for a long time used to make fun of Tom Friedman because of his embrace of neoliberal trade policies and, you know, neoliberalism and austerity generally. And I would continue to in that vein, but now he's talking about the very real threat that Donald Trump represents to our republic. And I think he's spot on in this. This is an op-ed he wrote. It was published a couple days ago, and he just updated it yesterday, saying that there was a piece in The Guardian very similar to his piece, but he didn't acknowledge them because he simply hadn't read it. And there was a piece in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution with the same kind of style as this. But basically what he wrote is a faux news piece, a news piece that is tongue-in-cheek news. And it is, shall we say, disheartening? September 3rd, Associated Press is the byline. President Trump stopped his motorcade in Manhattan today, jumped out of his limousine, and shot a man on Fifth Avenue who was shouting anti-Trump epithets. The shooting was recorded by the White House press pool as well as by dozens of bystanders with cell phones and by security cameras in the area. When asked for his reaction, House Speaker Paul Ryan said, "We will need more information than is available at this point." Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said through pursed lips that he was not going to comment on every up and down with this president. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes says he already has information indicating that the man whom Trump shot, quote, worked for the Clinton Foundation and may have been a relative of former Hillary Clinton aide Huma Abedin. Fox News did not cover Trump's shooting at the top of its broadcast, which focused instead on the killing of an Iowa woman by an undocumented immigrant. Fox's only reference to the fact that the president shot a man on Fifth Avenue was that, quote, a New York City man died today when he ran right into a bullet fired by the president. Senator Lindsey Graham quipped that, quote, Trump shoots as well as he putts, and that this incident would not cause the South Carolina senator to cancel his coming golf round with the president at his Bedminster, New Jersey course. And it continues along these lines. White House spokeswoman Sarah Huckabee Sanders told reporters that she was looking the other way when the shooting happened, so she had no comment, adding, I haven't had a chance to discuss it with the president. I'll get back to you if I have something. But the president has stated many times he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, so he's just keeping a campaign promise. He did nothing wrong. There are no charges against him, and even though I have no comment and he has no comment, we've commented on this extensively already. Tom Friedman goes on to say, hours later, though, the president tweeted, actually, some people are saying that a man who looked a lot like Barack Obama did the shooting. I'm not saying that, but some people are. It also could have been somebody sitting on their bed that weighs 400 pounds who fired that shot. Like Rudy said, truth is not truth unless I say so. End of tweet. And then he's got a quote from Jerry Falwell Jr., a top evangelical leader, announced that his movement would be holding a vigil this evening, praying that the president had not stressed himself too much by having to shoot a man on Fifth Avenue. Falwell added this never would have happened if Jeff Sessions were doing his job. And the day ended with Education Secretary Betsy DeVos declaring that the fact that the president could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight, quote, only proves again why we need to arm all our school teachers. Tom Friedman then goes on to talk about, his biggest challenge in writing this was that some people might actually think it's a real news story in the New York Times. And, spot on. I think a lot of people might think that. That's what we've come to. I mean, that's how grim this whole thing has gotten, is that, here we have a guy who has bragged about sexually assaulting women. I believe something like 20 women have now come forward and said that he sexually assaulted them. We're all in arms about Harvey Weinstein. What about Donald Trump? This is a guy who has admitted to attempting to conspire with a foreign government to flip our election. And essentially brags about it. Who is calling our media fake news in ways that, actually I want to get into that at the top of the next hour. I want to do a whole rant about Trump and the media and everything. So we'll pick up your phone calls right after the break here. It's 27 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, while we defend America from the conservative weapons of mass deception. Stick around. We'll be back with your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Notes on Debates in the Federal Convention of 1787, reported by James Madison. That would be the Constitutional Convention where everybody got together and wrote the Constitution. This is from Wednesday, August 22nd. Article 7, Section 4, resumed. Mr. Sherman was, and this is Madison's notes, so he's reporting what Mr. Sherman said. Mr. Sherman was for leaving the clause as it stands. He disapproved of the slave trade. Yet as the states were now possessed of the right to import slaves, as the public good did not require it to be taken from them, and as it was expedient to have as few objections as possible to the proposed scheme of government. The proposal, by the way, was to ban the importation of slaves after 1808 with the assumption that the states would rapidly end slavery shortly thereafter. And you'll hear that in just a minute. It was expedient to have as few objections as possible to the proposed scheme of government. He thought it best to leave the matter as we find it. He observed that the abolition of slavery seemed to be going on in the U.S. and that the good sense of the several states would probably by degrees complete it soon. He urged on the convention the necessity of dispatching its business. Colonel Mason spoke. This infernal traffic originated in the avarice of British nations. The British government constantly checked the attempts of Virginia to put a stop to it. The present question concerns not the importing of slaves alone, but the whole Union. The evil of having slaves was experienced during the late war. Had slaves been treated as they might have been by the enemy, they would have proved dangerous instruments in their hands. What he's talking about is the British offering slaves freedom if they came and fought for the British. But their folly dealt by the slaves as it did by the Tories. He mentioned the dangerous insurrections of the slaves in Greece and Sicily and the instructions given to by Cromwell to the commissioners sent to Virginia to arm the servants and slaves in case other means of obtaining its submission should fail. Maryland and Virginia had had already prohibited the importation of slaves expressly. North Carolina had done the same in substance. All this would be in vain if South Carolina and Georgia were at liberty to import. The Western people are already calling out for slaves for their new lands and will fill that country with slaves if they can be got through South Carolina and Georgia. Slavery discourages arts and manufactures. The poor despise labor when performed by slaves. They prevent the immigration of whites. They produce the most pernicious effect on manners. Every master of slaves is born a petty tyrant. they bring the judgment of heaven on a country. As nations cannot be rewarded or punished in the next world, they must be in this. By an inevitable chain of causes and effects, providence punishes national sins by national calamities. He lamented that some of our Eastern brethren had, from a lust of gain, embarked in this nefarious traffic. As to the states being in possession of the right to import, this was the case with many other rights now to be properly given up. He held it essential in every point of view that when the general government should have the power to the general government should have the power to prevent the increase of slavery. Mr. Ellsworth rose to spoke. As he had never owned a slave, could not judge on the effects of slavery on character. He said, however, that if it was to be considered in a moral light, we ought to go farther and free those already in our country. As slaves also multiply so fast in Virginia and Maryland that it is cheaper to raise than import them, whilst in the sickly rice swamps foreign supplies are necessary, if we go no further than is urged, we shall be unjust toward South Carolina and Georgia. Let us not intermeddle. As population increases, poor laborers will be so plenty as to render slaves useless. Slavery in time will not be a speck in our country. Provision is already made in Connecticut for abolishing it, and the abolition has already taken place in Massachusetts. As to the danger of insurrections from foreign influence, that will become a motive to kind treatment of the slaves and former slaves. Mr. Pinckney, if slavery be wrong, it is justified by the example of all the world. He cited the case of Greece, Rome, and other ancient states, the sanction given by France, England, Holland, and other modern states. In all ages, one half of mankind had been slaves. If the southern states were let alone, they would probably of themselves stop importations. He would himself, as a citizen of South Carolina, vote for it. An attempt to take away the right as proposed will produce serious objections to the Constitution, which he wished to see adopted. General Pinckney rose to speak and declared it to be his firm opinion that if himself and all his colleagues were to sign the Constitution and use their personal influence, it would be of no avail towards obtaining the assent of their constituents. South Carolina and Georgia cannot do without slaves. As to Virginia, she will gain by stopping the importation. Her slaves will rise in value, and she has more than she wants. It would be unequal to require South Carolina and Georgia to confederate on such unequal terms. He said the royal assent before the Revolution had never been refused to South Carolina, as to Virginia. He contended that the importation of slaves would be for the interest of the whole Union. The more slaves, the more produce to employ the carrying trade, the more consumption also, and the more of this, the more of revenue for the common treasury. He admitted it to be reasonable that slaves should be dutied like other imports, but should consider a rejection of the clause as an exclusion of South Carolina from the Union. Mr. Baldwin rose to speak, said he had conceived national objects alone to be before the convention, not such as like the present were of a local nature. Georgia was decided on this point. That state was always hitherto supposed a general government, and on it goes. It's a fascinating insight into what these guys were thinking and debating.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Alan in Beaumont, Texas, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of highlight, the guy, what's his name, Kavanaugh, that they're trying to put on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, Brett Kavanaugh. Yeah.
Yeah. In my opinion, the Democratic Party and the media are in complete, submission. And
I agree.
And what I'm talking about is when they speak of this man, they talk about they can't get his records and is he qualified, all his qualifications or lack thereof or whatever. To me, the only thing they should be talking about is the hypocrisy, the dishonesty, the lack of integrity of these Republicans for even trying to put the man up. Every time when Obama was in office, they changed every rule that there was before, to get their way on things.
Yep, they even changed the filibuster.
Why, instead of asking them about this man, why don't they call them out for their hypocrisy? When Obama had a chance to nominate somebody, we can't do that. It's an election coming up. Yeah. But it's perfectly fine to do it now. And they're not saying a word about it.
Well, there are a lot of Democrats who are speaking out on this, Alan. But you're right.
I mean, the media primarily.
Yeah, the media is by and large ignoring it, and the real elephant in the room, no pun on Republicans, is that Brett Kavanaugh worked for George W. Bush in the legal office in the White House that was participating in writing the memos that were authorizing illegal torture. And that's the stuff that they're hiding. That's the stuff that the Republicans are refusing to release and that the Democrats are saying that they want. And these hearings are going to start on Tuesday. Mitch McConnell is pushing this through, and we still don't have any of the information from the years that this guy was a partisan, right-wing, rabid, torture-loving pit bull for George W. Bush. And I think it would disqualify him, and that's why the Republicans are not allowing this stuff to come out. And on top of that, of course, Merrick Garland. I mean, Neil Gorsuch got his seat, but it should have been President Obama. He had the right to nominate somebody. So I'm with you, Alan. I'm disgusted and horrified by the whole thing. Thank you for the call and for bringing it up. Charles in Miami. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today? Charles, listening on Sirius XM.
Hello.
Hey, you're on the air. Charles, what's up?
Oh, how you doing, Tom? Good afternoon.
Thank you.
I was calling in reference to the guy that's supposed to be the suspected killer of the girl, and I guess it was Iowa.
Yeah.
And you referred to him as did you say an illegal alien?
I originally said he was an illegal alien, and then I said we really should refer to people like that as undocumented immigrants or undocumented persons, because people aren't illegal. His immigration status is outside the law, but it's not even felony law. So, if that's the point you were going to make, Charles.
Yeah, my point I wanted to make was either he would be considered illegally employed.
Yeah. Yeah, he was an illegal worker. You're right, and he was working for, according to the caller from Iowa in the last hour, a major Republican donor who owns a big farm in Iowa.
Yes, and I saw him. I saw that same guy, the donor, saying that we had him e-verified. Has that been verified?
Yeah.
That they went through all the proper procedures, and if that is the case, then it seems like with this administration, the way that they're harping on saving jobs and stopping illegals from taking jobs away from regular Americans, that they would want to change this immediately. That should be something that Mitch McConnell has on the docket immediately as well.
You would think so.
So I don't believe them. Well, I don't believe them. I think you skated so far because the press isn't looking into it.
Yeah.
And it's not an illegal worker here. I think that people are being illegally employed, and employers are stealing jobs from American workers.
Yeah, I've been saying for years, we don't have an illegal immigrant problem in the United States. We have an illegal employer problem. And if this guy did pass E-Verify, either he supplied false information or he actually is in this country legally. And we still don't know the answer to that. The news media is still saying we don't know, which means that the administration, which would have access to that information within minutes, is sitting on it, and you have to wonder, why would the Trump administration sit on information that might prove that somebody's in this country illegally when there is a possibility that information is actually exculpatory. It actually indicates that he is legally in this country, and that's the only reason I can think of that they're sitting on it. But they're trying to turn this into a giant, oh my God, brown people are killing white people thing, and they're succeeding on right-wing hate radio, and they're succeeding over on Fox so-called news. And, it's just a terrible thing. Charles, thanks for the call. Spot on. Steve in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Steve, what's up? Steve in Atlanta? Okay, Louise, you can check out. Steve is online, too. James in Franklin, Tennessee. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
The caller called in and said that the monkey part of this thing, he was spot on. What they should be is talking about socialism, because people don't know what a democratic socialist is, a lot of people. And just explain to them that it's about programs we need. And in 2008, the main corporations in the world went socialist overnight. They was willing to accept full pardon or to help from the society, the whole populace.
Yeah, trillions of dollars.
When it comes down to the populace getting the help, that's when it comes to a stop. And the Democratic strategists they've got up there, they're not in touch with really what's going on. The Democratic Party needs people like Richard Wolff and Norm Korsky and people like this talking for us. Yeah. They're out there just talking stuff that this is important. Yeah, well, we realize
the problem, James, that the Democratic Party.
The people that don't.
Yeah, I got it. The problem that the Democratic Party has right now is with the media. You know, back when Bill Clinton was president, there was always more Republicans than Democrats on Meet the Press and the other Sunday shows. And when they were confronted about why that was, they said, well, you know, you've got to have the opposition voice. The Democrats control the House and or control the government. And then when George W. Bush came along and became president, again, Meet the Press had more Republicans than Democrats on regularly. Why is that? Well, because you've got a Republican administration in charge. You have to listen to them. And this continues literally to this day. It's very rare that you see an actual progressive on television on any of these networks. And the messages are not, you know, it's not that the Democrats aren't saying these things that need to be said. It's that nobody's hearing them say it because they are denied the megaphone of corporate media. Steve in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Yeah, I first of all, I have to thank you for having the courage even to talk about racism. But the question is, first of all, yesterday I called him. Were you able to find out anything about the Peachtree Street thing?
Oh, no, I haven't, Steve. I'm sorry. I totally spaced it. I had to run home right after I got off the air.
Okay. Now, the other big question is, do you think that racism will ever be undone? And why do we have racism? And when do you think it would ever be undone in our lifetime?
Yeah. I think that the reason
why are people racist?
I think the reason why we have racism is that as a species, as the human race, we are all born, and I think this is true of most mammals, we are born with an instinct to protect first those closest to us genetically. Family, basically, and then clan, and then tribe, and then nation, you know, and so our bonds with other people diminish as they become, less like us. I think that the way we overcome racism is by finding things that bind us together that are stronger than the color of our skin, our shared values, our shared struggles, our shared perspectives, our shared worldviews, which all kind of fall under the rubric of values. And I think that, and one of the things that we know is that measurable racism among white people is higher in areas where white people have had no contact with black people throughout their lives, and lower, generally speaking, in areas where people have had a fair amount of contact with people of color, with different races. And so the whole idea of integration, even if it's done in a way that, like with forced busing, in a way that as many people object to, is still, I think, one of the most useful ways to prevent long-term racism. We need to build that sense of community, tribe, and family in a way that is stronger than just how we look. Does that make sense, Steve?
Yeah, it does make sense, but I guess I came up during Dr. King and the civil rights era, and I guess I'm not quite as naive as I was, but I really was hoping, but is it reasonable for me to say that really now, I'm 72, it's not going to hardly change in the next 30 years, right?
Oh, I think it will.
Or longer.
I think it will. I think this millennial generation coming up there's a big change. I think that the generation that are now you and me, Steve, the boomers, we saw a big change, in the post-Brown versus Board of Education and the civil rights movement and all that. There was a change, but we still carry the baggage of having grown up in a society and a culture where people of color were portrayed as not smart and inarticulate and things like that. And I think this millennial generation coming up really gets it. So I'm quite hopeful, actually. Steve, thank you for the call and for a thought-provoking conversation. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We're going to check in with Talk Media News in about 4 minutes, so stick around. We'll be back 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The other piece of that, by the way, in addition to people getting to know each other, is the positive portrayal of minorities in the media, which we really need to be encouraging. And welcome back. Rick, watching Free Speech TV in Lexington, Kentucky. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call, Mr. Hartmann.
My pleasure. Call me Tom.
Did you hear the frustration and the desperation in that man's voice that you just got through talking to about racism?
Steve? Well, I heard, I thought some sadness, too. You know, he's 72 years old. He doesn't think he's going to see anything solved in his lifetime.
I'm 65, okay? Do you understand how frustrated it is to live most of your life and fight these battles or see them fought and think we were in a really better place and to have to regress back to where we are right now? It's disappointing.
Yeah, I can't literally imagine it, Rick. I mean, I try to imagine it. I try to imagine what it must be like. But
I know you're getting short on time. Let me ask you a point.
Go for it.
I watched the news last night, listened to the situation with the Florida debacle, with the governor's race, with the comment.
Right.
And my comment to you is you did a great job always doing this show talking about racism. They did a great job on the news last night talking about racism, okay? But how do you get to the point where white people can talk to white people? That's the problem, Tom. Yeah. What I would like for everybody to try to comprehend a little bit is the news media finds it very hard to talk to white people about racism. By the end of the segment, talking about racism, why the man said monkey, they had turned the segment around to be careful. You don't want to alienate those people, white people. They'll get mad, and the Democrats will be in trouble.
Yeah, isn't that pathetic?
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how you're gonna talk to white people about racism?
Well, I get it. I absolutely agree with you, Rick. And keep in mind the Republican bias of most of that media. The majority of the listeners and viewers to my program are I'm certain white. I mean, that's just the nature of this beast. And
I can give you a compliment though. A lot of black people have called your show though.
I've noticed that, and I think that's that apparently I've created a safe.
Let me make one quick suggestion for you. That big TV that you have behind you, every now and then put America and American on top of it, and then you pick out whatever you think that is. Freedom of religion, or voting rights, whatever you want to put up under that makes you an American in America. And then on the side, you put Americans, and then you put Republicans. And whatever your list is, draw the lines to what side do you think is American.
That would be a great TV segment. It really would. Right now, though, this monitor can only display a static picture.
I really appreciate the show.
Thanks a lot, Rick. Good to hear from you.
All right.
Yeah, I appreciate it. What I was saying before, though, and just to finish that thought, was, I think the majority of my audience is white, and one of the things that I'm trying to do pretty much every day, certainly every week, is talk to white people about race as a white person, as a white guy who spent most of his life as a clueless white guy about race and, thought I understood it, and all the things that I've learned just in the last 15 years I've been doing this show. And anyhow, I hope I'm accomplishing that. We'll be back. Bob Naya is going to be with us with Talk Media News, so stick around. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have, and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Let's check in with Bob Ney with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com, Ellen Ratner's charity based in South Sudan, and Loving What You Do, Ellen's new book. Bob is the author of Sideswiped, the book to read if you want to learn how Congress works, how the House of Representatives works, and Washington, D.C. in general. Congressman, welcome back to the program. Bob?
Thank you. Yes,
oh, I've got him on hybrid one, Sean. I'm sorry. So what's going on in the world today?
Well, there's a lot of things, but if I could digress from the president for a second, this is the 9th day of a national strike, and a lot of people may not even know that.
Are you talking the prison strike or the school strike?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The prison strike, and it's not getting, I think, a lot of follow-up attention, but there are, certain demands being made by inmates across the United States. And there are protests that are actually going on in about 17 states right now with national, demands. And I just wanted to report on this because I do have personal upfront knowledge of this since I spent time in the Bush Housing Program, also known as Morgantown Federal Corrections, over there. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of problems, and the one that I really wanted to focus on, too, is there's a group called Unicor, and people are doing labor, and you're paid a little bit more if you work in Unicor in prisons. You might make $40 a month for it. But the bottom line is that corporations are making, excessive money
billions
off of doing this labor.
Yeah.
Now, and they're going to point this out, the inmates are. People will say, well, there's a 22% better chance if you have, rehabilitation in prison or a job such as this that you will, make success on the outside world. And, that may be a figure which may not be high, and maybe, we would say, well, 22% is still better than nothing. But there are other things that can be done, including treating mental illness, which is not done in the prisons, and including some productive, work training. And Unicor is not that type of productive work training.
And paying an appropriate wage.
Well, yes. And once you learn how to operate on that computer, you know it, whether you do it again or not,
right.
You'll know it. And the problem with Unicor is for $40 a month, that company is making, unbelievable amounts of money.
Right.
So
Bob,
hopefully...
hopefully, finish your thought. I'm sorry.
Well, hopefully this will get some attention with the media and the powers to be in Washington, D.C., because they have some very legitimate demands. And one other thing, prisoners are tortured with family visits. Let me just say that again, tortured. I have personally seen people turned away because the prison guard decides they don't like the clothing the person has. Or they decided they don't have a pair of socks on with their shoes. They are turned away after driving 8, 9, 10, 11 hours to see their loved ones, literally turned away.
Wow.
It happens all the time.
The 13th Amendment that ended slavery in the United States didn't actually end slavery in the United States. It specifies that if a person is convicted of a crime, they may still be, number one, subject to involuntary servitude, but also they may be subjected to slavery. That slavery under the 13th Amendment is still legal in the United States as long as it's applied to somebody who is convicted of a crime. Is there any kind of a movement to amend the 13th Amendment to take that slavery provision out?
Not that I know of, because you're correct. The 13th Amendment, which, quote, abolished slavery, actually wrote slavery into our Constitution, literally.
Yes.
And you're right. They did it with involuntary servitude if you've committed a crime. So it actually wrote slavery into the Constitution.
Yeah, and the word slavery appears there. Yep.
Right.
So,
and also Victoria's Secret, by the way, has used employees. Starbucks have used employees within the
prison employees?
Inmates. Yes, sir.
Yeah, remarkable.
Yeah.
Bob,
I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We can't say it often enough. What else is going on in the world today?
Well, Don McGahn, who, by the way, as a matter of disclosure, he did some work for us when he was doing work for the House Republican
Right, you know this guy.
Committee. Oh, yes, he did work for us and also had given us some advice, the committee I chaired, I should say, advice on election law way back when, in 2001, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, I know Don McGahn, yes. Now, I haven't talked to him since. He's went to the White House. But he has exited the White House. Tom, it was an open secret in D.C. this summer. Don McGahn was going to leave. That's a fact. At some point in time, he would exit. Of course, he interviewed with Mueller for over 30 hours. We know that. But the president has basically, because all of our sources tell us McGahn was surprised when he read the tweet. The president may not have said it, but he has fired him with a tweet.
Right.
That's exactly what he's done. And the next one on the list is Sessions. And to follow up with a story that you and I did about a week ago, Lindsey Graham, who originally said you will not get rid of Sessions, you could read between the lines a couple of weeks ago where Lindsey Graham was saying, well, we would have time for things. Anyway, the president's escalating, still trying to fire Sessions as we speak, and the Republicans are trying to stop
and I think he's going to do it. The question is he going to do it before or after the November election, the congressional elections? Bob Ney, author of Sideswipe. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Today we're reading The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio. This is from the first chapter. For decades, Pence had presented himself as a humble servant who could be entrusted with power because he was at heart a mild-mannered Midwesterner. Friends and foes alike said his major character trait was extreme niceness. When given the opportunity, Pence described himself as a true Hoosier, son of Indiana, who was a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. This is how he had introduced himself to the country at the Republican National Convention 6 months earlier. The list contrasted with the usual pledge politicians make to put country first. This is what President Obama did after the 2016 election, when he said, "We are not Democrats first, we are not Republicans first, we are Americans first." The vice president's self-declared identity revealed both his priorities and the source of his power. For 30 years, he had helped lead the Republican Party into a closer alliance with preachers who were turning evangelical Christianity from a religion into a political crusade that engaged in a culture war with non-believers. The aim of many was to destroy abortion rights, roll back the equality gained by gay citizens, and prepare the nation for the second coming of Christ. Pence and others used martial metaphors and considered themselves warriors of the Christian right, both besieged and called upon to fight. Quote, "Those who would have us ignore the battle being fought over life, marriage, and religious liberty have forgotten the lessons of history," said Pence in 2010. "America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments trumped moral principles." Pence's allies in his war included hugely wealthy donors who, despite their vast wealth accumulated at a time of historic inequality, also posed as victims. As libertarians in the mold of Ayn Rand's cardboard characters, they felt inhibited in the pursuit of even greater riches by a government that imposed foolish regulations and would redistribute their wealth to the supposedly indolent poor. Starting with this perspective, they denied the science behind environmental protection, demanded tax cuts for themselves, and insisted on massive reductions in programs serving anyone who wasn't rich. The victimhood claimed by both the libertarians and the Christian right permitted the construction of an alternative reality that denied their own power and masked their ambition to make politics and culture conform to an ideology that included white Christian supremacy and predatory capitalism. It also denied the progress they had made in their construction of their own political might. With his oath of office, Vice President Pence became both the free marketer's hero and the most successful Christian supremacist in American history. Most of Pence's life had been preparation for this moment, and possibly one more. His lifelong goal, set when he was a boy, was the Oval Office itself. Remarkably, he had reached this point by tying his fate to Donald J. Trump, a man whose immorality in the form of lying, cheating, and deceiving in every aspect of his life, from his marriage to his businesses, had made him a living exemplar of everything that Christianity and conservatism abhorred. However, this record also suggested that Pence was more likely to assume the highest office in the land than most vice presidents who had come before. To put it bluntly, Trump was vulnerable to impeachment. If this occurred, Pence would see the hand of God at work in his elevation to the presidency. In the meantime, he would wait and watch. On Inauguration Day, with Pence looking on, a slightly stooped Donald Trump stepped forward when it was his turn to face the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Beside Trump stood his wife, Melania, the former fashion model, who held two Bibles, Lincoln's and Trump's own. At the stroke of noon, the president-elect raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bibles. As he did this, Trump's family members and hundreds of political and government figures strained to see the moment. Trump and Pence were a study in contrast. At age 58, Pence appeared trim, perhaps even athletic, and could have passed for a man 10 years younger. His jacket was neatly buttoned, his hands were clasped at his waist, and his smooth face was set in a half smile. Mere feet away, in sum, he resembled a small-town pastor, or maybe even a funeral director. Mere feet away, a stern-faced 70-year-old Trump stood with his coat hanging open like a caftan to reveal a long red necktie. Despite much cosmetic intervention, he looked old and tired. At the conclusion of the presidential oath, which had been voiced by 44 presidents before him, Trump said the words, "So help me God," and accepted the congratulations of those closest to him with a thin-lipped, toothless grin. He then delivered a 15-minute speech replete with distortions and falsehoods that were his trademark. He declared that America was awash with crime and despair and under constant attack. "This American carnage stops right here and stops right now," said Trump. It was the most remembered phrase of the address. That was some weird S-word, former President George W. Bush was heard to remark as he left the inaugural stand. Weird was the mildest word that one could attach to the 45th President of the United States as he launched an administration that would be stained by scandal and corruption so broad it defied a citizen's ability to grasp. cronyism, secrecy, and nepotism would flourish. Presidential lies, daily cataloged by the Washington Post and others, would come at the rate of more than 150 per month. From the moment of his oath, Mike Pence, the vice president, faced the historic, some would say daunting, challenge of dealing with an erratic and undisciplined commander-in-chief. The book, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So in the New York Times, Jim Rutenberg and Maggie Haberman, well, welcome back to the third hour of our program, by the way. Jim Rutenberg and Maggie Haberman are talking about, well, the headline says it all. National Enquirer had decades of Trump dirt. He, Trump, wanted to buy it all. And they're talking about how, well, we know that there's these two women, you know, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, who Trump had affairs with, had sexual relationships with. The one with Karen McDougal apparently lasted almost a year, both in the year after Donald Trump, while Donald Trump's wife Melania, his third wife Melania, was pregnant with Barron, their youngest child, and in the year immediately following that birth. And Trump was using David Pecker and American Media, or whatever, I think American Media is the name of the company that owns the National Enquirer, to bury some of these stories. But it turns out that, to quote the article, it turns out that Mr. Trump wanted to go even further. He and his lawyer, Michael Cohen, they write, devised a plan to buy up all the dirt on Trump that the National Enquirer and its parent company collected on him all the way back to the 1980s. And the way that we know about this is that tape that Michael Cohen released, well, looking back on it now, you know, with this understanding, this is one of the things that Michael Cohen was actually talking about on that tape. He said, and I quote, "It's all the stuff," because you never know, right? You never know which one of these stories is going to come out and end up, you know, biting you in the butt. It raises this issue of the cozy relationship, this grifter relationship, essentially, between one of the major media companies in the United States. You say, oh, the National Enquirer, well, there's dozens of these small tabloid newspapers, or these tabloid newspapers. They're not small. Their circulation in many cases larger than, you know, the major city newspapers. There's dozens of them. They're all owned by one company now. There's been this, or the vast majority of them anyhow, are owned by David Pecker's company. There's been this incredible consolidation in the supermarket tabloids under one company. And that company has been working, apparently, we know, with Donald Trump for decades to protect this billionaire grifter. And presumably, they've been hiding the crimes of other billionaire grifters. It looks like, you know, perhaps Elliot Broidy, for example, the guy who was the finance chair for the Republican Party and who paid off a mistress for having either a baby or an abortion. I don't remember which it was. I think it was an abortion. In fact, I'm quite sure it was an abortion. Paid her something like $1 million. This whole culture of grifter, and how this culture of grifter not only exists at the level of, you know, billionaire Trump and multimillionaire or billionaire Broidy and David Pecker's company and the National Enquirer and whatnot, but right up through our entire economy, up and down throughout our entire economy. We have, by and large, become a nation that has lost its values. We used to think the economy was here to serve us, right? The whole point of having an economy, of having a stable currency and having a court system that enforces the rules of an economy, the whole point of and allowing corporations to have special privileges and corporate owners to have certain rights and privileges that normal people don't have. All of that was in exchange. It was part of a social contract in exchange for corporations behaving well, doing good things for people. And since the Reagan era, since Reagan changed the rules of the game of capitalism, all that has changed. And we have now just become this grifter country with a grifter media, and I would put Fox so-called News in this category too, owned by another billionaire, Rupert Murdoch. Interesting, there's been a couple of pieces lately about how Murdoch basically polluted the media of Australia. He's the single largest newspaper owner in Australia to this day. And then he moved on to the UK, where he bought a whole bunch of UK newspapers, including the Times of London, and turned them into party organs and flipped UK politics to the right, as he did Australia's first. And then he flipped UK's politics to the right, and you got the rise of Maggie Thatcher and all this other stuff. And then he came to the United States and became a U.S. citizen and started Fox so-called News and bought the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post. And he's flipped the United States politics hard to the right, all in favor of the billionaires. You know, another grifter here, essentially. And then Trump is taking this grift, this you know, oh, the media, well, you can't trust the media, right? You can trust the National Enquirer, but not the rest of the media. And he has taken this up to elevate it to call the press in the United States, and you know, I mean, I've been doing this program for 15 years. I have certainly had my long list of complaints about the corporate media in the United States, about my interactions with them, and about how they you know portray progressives and how they you know basically shill for their own interests and all these kind of things, their own commercial interests. But still, it's the press, right? I mean, you know, right now Trump is going after CNN because they published this story that Bob Woodward, Carl Bernstein wrote, Woodward's old writing partner. Carl Bernstein wrote saying that Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, you know, another grifter, Michael Cohen, was willing to testify that he knew that Trump knew about the Trump Tower meeting, that his son and his daughter and son-in-law and whatnot were part of, along with a bunch of Russians. And it turns out that that was from Lanny Davis, and Lanny Davis has now walked that back and said, well, that wasn't true, actually. And so CNN kind of got caught with this, and Trump is like just trashing them every single day. See, you told a lie. And, you know, once, and they didn't know it was a lie. They trusted Lanny Davis, and they still say they've got another source for this, and it may turn out that it actually is true. CNN is so far stuck by their guns, or at least they had as of two and a half hours ago when we went on the air here, 2 hours and 15 minutes ago. But so Trump has one, I mean, you know, you go to MediaMatters.org and you can literally every day, every single day, see the lies being told on Fox News being debunked on Media Matters. Literally every day. Trump gets one mistake that CNN has made in maybe a year, and he's turning it into like a federal, you know, they are the enemy of the people. See, they're the enemy of the people. And this guy, Robert Chain, listens to this and gets on a plane or drives his car or whatever and heads to Boston to murder Boston Globe reporters. He calls them up, and this is via Tom Winter at NBC News, a transcript of the calls. He calls up the Boston Globe and leaves this message. You're the enemy of the people, and we're going to kill every effing one of you. Now, he's spelling these words out. I'm going to abbreviate them. Hey, why don't you call the F? Why don't you call Mueller? Why don't you, maybe he can help you out, buddy. Still there? And then he uses the F word that's a slur for gay people. All right, why are you gonna trace my call? What are you going to do, MFer? You ain't gonna do S word. I'm gonna shoot you in the effing head later today at 4 o'clock. Goodbye. Apparently he said that to the person who answered the phone. You're the enemy of the people. Now, where did he hear that? I doubt, he's 68 years old. I don't think he's old enough to have heard it from Joseph Stalin, who's the guy who turned it into a mantra in the Soviet Union in the 1950s, 40s, and 50s. He heard it from Donald Trump. Donald Trump, quote, I just cannot state strongly enough how totally dishonest much of the media is. Truth doesn't matter to them. They only have their hatred and agenda. This includes fake books which come out about me all the time, always anonymous sources, and are pure fiction, enemy of the people. That was today. This guy threatened the Boston Globe a few days ago. He was arrested today, Robert Chain. But this is where we go. And now Trump is saying, oh, yeah, and by the way, you know, Clinton's email was hacked by China. It wasn't just the Russians. And the FBI has to come out and say, no, no evidence. President's lying. Well, they didn't say that, but it's fairly obvious. I get the fundraiser from Jeff Merkley. I mean, people are waking up and pushing back and saying, we're enough of the grift and enough of the fundamentally anti-American hatred of the press. Right? Politicians have always been uncomfortable about the press. But calling them the enemy of the people, I literally as Stalinist. Jeff Merkley sends a fundraising email. Late last year, I called for Donald Trump's resignation. His record of abuse is abhorrent and reason enough for him to go. At least 17 women have accused him of sexual misconduct. I believe them. Since then, he was implicated in a criminal conspiracy to violate federal campaign law to influence the 2016 election. Several of his top campaign officials have been convicted or pled guilty. And that's not all. He's undermined our opinion in the world by distancing our allies and embracing Putin, and he ordered children to be locked in cages after being separated from their families at the southern border. And no, he certainly has not resigned. He's digging in as deep as he can. And he's being enabled all the way by a compliant Republican-led Congress. This is where we're at. We still have over 500 children that have been separated from their families. These 3-, 4-, 5-year-olds are being, the few that have been reunited, in many cases literally don't recognize their parents. You probably have seen these viral videos of this mother begging her little 3-year-old child to acknowledge her and him going, no, I don't know you, stay away. Because they had been separated for 3, 4, 5 months. This is criminal what these people are doing.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I just so hope America wakes up and votes these people out of office. We'll be back at 17 minutes past. And welcome back. Let's see here. Greg in Tatum, Washington. Hey, Greg, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I've been listening to you for a while, and you're basically the main news I get. I don't trust a lot of the other news. But I've heard recently or a while back about bank bail-ins. Instead of the banks getting bailed out by the government, then the banks, if the banks fail, then they'll go to all their investors, which basically would be my meager sum that's in their bank.
Yeah, your checking and savings account, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, I've looked it up on the internet, and I don't really find any solid news that I can trust, and you're the only one I can trust with some an accurate explanation of this.
I remember after the crash of 2008 where the bank bail-ins were being debated in Congress, Greg, I don't remember, I believe that was passed. I think that was written into one of the laws in that time, but I don't have the details. So I can't give you a definitive answer. I'd have to look it up, and I'm real reluctant to say things I'm not sure of.
I can't find anything.
Yeah.
You know, would that make it where it might be, if I put my money into stocks, I mean, the company might go down, but my money wouldn't be in their bank. I don't have very much, and I'm on Social Security. I'm living off grid out here in the country, and I can't afford to have the bank all of a sudden take my meager amount that I've saved up.
Yeah.
It makes my life semi-comfortable.
It looks like this wasn't passed. I'm just Googling this right now, and why bank bail-ins will be the new bailouts, and the government is switching tactics. America's warned bail-ins are coming. Are you prepared for bail-ins? But I'm not seeing, and most of them seem to be from hard right websites, WorldNet Daily kind of stuff. So I'm guessing that the whole bail-in thing didn't actually pass. Hang on just a second here. This is a piece in the Huffington Post. You can generally trust this. Okay, this was published by December of 2017 by Ellen Brown, and I trust Ellen Brown's reporting. She's really good. She wrote Web of Debt. That's her website, in fact, webofdebt.com. And she says that this is the Financial Stability Board changing the rules of international banking. So in theory, let's see here, more on that, the Financial Stability Board. Yeah, apparently there's an international standard that now allows for bank bail-ins, but whether it applies here to the United States, I can't tell you. Ellen tends to write fairly dense stuff, and I've gone through 4 pages of this now, just skimming it as we're talking, and I don't see clear, concise answer that bail-ins are actually here. So I wouldn't, I wouldn't freak out about it too much. I mean, we do have federal deposit insurance. Your money up to $200,000 or $250,000 is government insured in every bank, and if you have more than that, you put it in multiple banks.
No, I don't. But
yeah.
I've heard that they're defunding that, and it's like,
they have cut back the funding for it, but it's still there. It's still there. I would not be so concerned about that, Greg. There's I think far more important things to be worried about. Greg, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you. And thanks for listening to KTRS, I believe it was. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back to the program. Thom Hartmann here with you. My apologies for the long music bed coming back in from that break. We had an automation system failure. But we're back. We're here. And Michael in New York City. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today? Michael, listening on Sirius XM in New York? Okay, I'm going to put...
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're on the air, Michael. What's up?
Okay. No, I'm sorry about that. For some reason, the mute button on my phone actually accidentally was pressed.
No problem.
What's on my mind? I am very, very concerned what has gone down with DeSantis' comment of the monkeying. First off, and you and I have met before. You know I'm African-American. And the fact that he's going to use that term in talking about his African-American opponent, do not tell me, not saying you, do not tell me, right-wingers, that we're making something out of nothing when that term has been used for so many years, so many times in terms of monkeys, gorillas, and then you have illegitimate president who is referred to all minorities as animals, again, so wrongly. And then when you add to that, and this is the scary part, within the same 12 to 18 hours, you have Trump saying that if the GOP loses, there's going to be violence, inciting violence, and then later on doubles down or tries to clarify, saying that we're the ones who are going to be violent. We, the liberals, we, the minorities, African Americans, Puerto Ricans, whatever you want to call it, which is a flat out lie. You look back to Charlottesville, it was his base who crossed out of territory into the opposing territory and initiated the violence.
And killed somebody.
Again, with his violence. And killed somebody, again, with his violent rhetoric. And then add to that, Tom, he falsely tells right-wing evangelicals that he lifted up this ban prohibiting preachers from using the pulpit to politicize and encourage people to vote one particular way. That has never been lifted.
Yeah, no, he lied to the church people, and he lies to all of us. And by the way, the one piece you missed, Michael, is the subtext of his saying, oh, no, it's the liberals they hate so much, you know, that are going to be the violent ones. The subtext to that is, hey, right-winger racists out there, get more guns, get more ammunition. I mean, that's essentially what he's saying, you know. And what we have to acknowledge is, you know, when he says that there's going to be violence on the left, what he's saying is get ready. And that is dangerous talk. That is pouring gasoline on a fire.
It is dangerous, and I fear that something will happen even on Election Day, perpetrated by them, and then they're going to point the finger to us. You know there are people on our side that will not take this line down. They have a right to self-defense. They will try to stop the violence or flee from it, but
it could be a real mess. Michael, we're out of time here, but it could be a real mess. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the sane among us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Right back with your calls right after this. For today is Into the Hands of the Soldiers, Freedom and Chaos in Egypt and the Middle East by David D. Kirkpatrick, who is the international correspondent for the New York Times. This is from Chapter 1. Driving east from Tunis may be the best way to take in the miracle of the Nile. The road follows the Mediterranean coast for about 1,700 miles. Almost every inch of it is brown 12 months a year, rock and sand baking in the sun. Then you cross an invisible line at the edge of the Nile Valley. Everywhere is an eruption of green. Not even the congestion of Cairo can contain the riot of vegetation. For millennia, no other territory in the Middle East produced such a bounty. Where the yearly flooding of the Euphrates was violent and destructive, the cycles of the Nile were gentle and predictable. A truism holds that the histories of Egypt and Iraq followed their rivers. Medieval sultans dug a well, known today as the Nilometer, on Rauda Island in Cairo, to measure the water level. The annual rise determined how generous the crops would be that year, and the sultans taxed the peasants accordingly. Farming was that easy. The Nile Valley became the breadbasket of the Arab world. Egyptians swelled with pride in their river. Whoever drinks the water of the Nile will return again to Egypt, the old saying goes. Egyptians also like to say that they have been rallying around grand national projects since the pharaohs built the temples of Thebes. After taking power in 1952, President Gamal Abdel Nasser decided to build a great dam at Aswan near the Sudanese border to harness the Nile for hydroelectric power. Abdel Nasser promised a dam more magnificent and 17 times greater than the pyramids. Excuse me. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles announced in 1955 that the United States and the United Kingdom would provide $70 million in assistance for construction of the dam. But he did not like Nasser's denunciations of colonialism or his refusal to ally exclusively with Washington. After 7 months, Dulles withdrew the offer. Abdel Nasser returned to Moscow. The dam became a monument to Stalinist engineering. Its construction displaced 120,000 Nubians, the dark-skinned Egyptians indigenous to the area. The lake formed by the dam nearly demolished the breathtaking pharaonic temples at Abu Simbel. UNESCO saved them by paying Western European contractors to relocate the complex, stone by stone, on drier ground. The finished dam stopped the flow of silt and nutrients that had kept much of the Nile Valley fertile for centuries. The depletion of the water devastated the farmlands downstream and the fishing around the mouth of the Nile. The slowing of the current led to an explosion in waterborne diseases like schistosomiasis. To fight the disease, Nasser's successors launched a massive campaign of inoculations. But government health workers reused unsterilized needles. That set off a hepatitis C epidemic that raged on for decades. About 1 in 5 Egyptians was infected with virus C, as Egyptians called it in imported English. Barbers spread the disease by reusing blades, so sensible Egyptian men carried their own personal shears to haircuts, as I did as well. The adage about drinking the Nile water lives on today as black humor. The river is so filthy that your first stop would be a hospital. Yet Egyptian school children are still taught to celebrate Abdel Nasser's high dam as an unalloyed triumph. I think of the dam whenever I get a haircut, a parable of centralized planning and unaccountable power. I had the luck to be an American journalist living in Cairo during the 30 months when Egyptians broke free of the autocracy that ruled them. Their escape set off revolts from Benghazi to Baghdad. But the old authoritarian order had only hidden underground, not shattered. It returned to take revenge. A reinvigorated autocracy did its best to blot out the memory of those first 30 months of freedom. Let me tell you this story. Chapter 2, City of Contradictions, August 14th, 2010. My introduction to Egypt was an iftar, the ritual meal at dusk to break the Ramadan fast, on a gritty day in August 2010. My family and I had moved that week into a one-story villa in Maidi, a leafy district about 6 miles up the Nile from the New York Times Bureau on the island of Zamalek. Both neighborhoods, Maadi and Zamalek, are full of Western expats and Egyptian old money. I had a 20-minute drive to work if the streets were empty. Usually the lawless traffic made the trip more than an hour. Mercedes sedans and Land Rovers veered around donkey carts stacked with carrots or garlic. Families of 4 or 5 crammed on the backs of Korean motorcycles, and mothers rode side-saddled with infants in their arms. My wife Laura and I had hauled our 1-year-old's car seat all the way from Washington. We felt so fussy. I was drawn to Egypt in part by the terrorist attacks of 9/11. I knew the roots of al-Qaeda and its ideology ran back to Egypt. Also, I had turned 40 in 2010. I wanted a change from Washington, where I had reported for the previous 6 years. That was about the extent of my preparation for my posting to Cairo. I was thrilled with the job. Egypt was home to a quarter of all Arabs, had set every major trend in religion, culture, and politics across the Arab world for more than half a century. Egypt commanded the largest Arab army and held together the region. It kept the peace with Israel. After Israel, Cairo had received more United States aid over the decades than any other country, over $70 billion, at the rate of $1.5 billion a year at the time I arrived. The book, Into the Hands of the Soldiers.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Ron in Benton Harbor, Michigan. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Tim, I wanted to talk about the depth of the oceans. The orcas that populated the Puget Sound are about 75 strong in that pond. They have not had babies in 3 years.
Ron, forgive my interrupting you. I know you were on hold for quite a while, but your phone is breaking up so badly I can hardly tell what you're saying. I'm going to put you on hold. Louise, Ron is on line 3, and maybe he can call back, or we can figure out some way to make him intelligible. But I can't understand what he's saying. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I'd just like to relate a small anecdotal story to you to shine a light on what we're all dealing with. I've been driving around doing errands while listening to your show, and I found myself behind an expensive crossover that had 2 really revolting bumper stickers on it. One said, "Prisoner of Obama Policy," and in other words, POOP. And the two O's were in that round emblem that was the symbol of Obama's campaign.
Right.
And on the other side was a bumper sticker saying that I fear something about I don't fear for my country, I fear my government. And we have beautiful weather today in Chicago, so when I pulled up alongside this vehicle at a red light, both of our windows were open, and I said, "Excuse me, ma'am," to the middle-aged suburban matron driving. I said, "I think your bumper stickers are a little out of date." And she just glared at me. "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, President Obama's been out of office for 19 months. There's no way you could be a prisoner of his policies because your guy's been in for 19 months and has destroyed just about all of them." And I said, "I don't understand why you fear your government, because your guy's in there. You should love it." And she let loose with a torrent of invective laced with vulgarities you would not expect from a prosperous suburban woman. And then I said to her, "Are you a patriot?" And she said, "Of course I am." I said, "Well, why are you driving a foreign vehicle? Why didn't you buy an American vehicle built by Americans?" And I got more of the same. So this is the fuel that fuels Trump's machine, and he's not ashamed to use it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and in all probability, she watches Fox News. I mean, this is the poison in our body politics right now. George, thanks for the call and sharing that story. Diane in Fort White, Florida. Am I saying that right, Diane?
Yes, sir. Hold on, I got chicken salad all over me.
Uh-oh.
Ron DeSantis' wife, her maiden name is Casey Black. She was a former anchor woman for WJXT out of Jacksonville. If anybody should know, watch what you say when you're on camera. His wife would. And when I saw that commercial where she let him use their children like that and all those babies were locked in cages, I just thought, I cannot believe what I'm watching. I mean, I never felt one way or the other about her, but I certainly know how I feel now.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
And I voted for Gillum.
There you
go. A lot of other Floridians did as well.
Is it your sense as a Floridian that the state actually could go blue?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I honestly, I do. And I was really leaning toward Gwen Graham because I liked her dad when he was governor. But when I found out that their family was financing that giant mega mall in South Florida near the Everglades, I just could not bring myself to vote for her. And then the more I looked at him, the more I decided he's the guy for the future.
That's I understand Gillum was the only candidate, the only Democratic candidate who was not a multimillionaire.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
Thanks for your time.
Sure, Diane. Thanks for the call and thanks for the heads up. Nick in Springdale, Washington. Excuse me. Hey, Rick or Nick? No, it's Rick.
Yeah,
hey, Rick.
It is Rick.
What's up?
Okay. Well, I heard a caller just a couple minutes ago talking about the banks, and he was afraid about losing his money.
Yeah.
Well, why don't these people, and I think you got to stress this point, is why don't they start getting into the credit unions?
Yeah, that's a good point. I should have made it.
That's what I had to do a while ago, and it's really worked out, and I'm really happy I did it.
Yeah, I agree. And I use a credit union. I think that credit unions are a really good alternative to banks. If you have your money in a credit union, you own the credit union. And you can become an officer of the credit union by simply running in the election. And there are no stockholders outside of the depositors. And and the executives are hired by the board, and the board is gathered from among the depositors, people who decide that they want to be part of it. And the profits are typically reinvested in the credit union and in the community instead of going off to some billionaire in Wall Street. So yeah, spot on, Mark. Excellent point, and thank you. Or excuse me, Rick. No, Nick. Rick. Yeah. Thank you for calling and thank you for making that point. Mark in Nashville, Tennessee. Mark, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, thank you for taking my call, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
It seems to me, if I recall correctly, Brett Kavanaugh testified before the Senate for the current judgeship he currently holds, and he lied under oath.
That is apparent. I'm not sure it's definite, but it seems to be.
It seems to me lying under oath is a criminal, is a crime.
Yes.
And now we have Mitch McConnell and Trump basically aiding and abetting that lie by refusing to release that documentation.
Yes. You're right.
They should all be arrested.
Or impeached, or both. Yeah, I completely agree. And the fact that they're going to start the hearings on Tuesday on Kavanaugh without the documents that the Democrats are asking for is just breathtaking. I mean, it's just beyond the pale.
When is the mainstream press going to start bringing this out? I mean, I know Fox will never do that. That's ridiculous, of course. But what about ABC, NBC, CBS, and all the rest, pointing out the fact that
they have such a bias on behalf of the Republicans and the whole pro-business thing. These are multi-billion-dollar corporations. It's just not just the press. And in fact, much of the press is owned by companies whose principal business has nothing to do with the press. So you're not necessarily going to get the story that the Democrats are trying to tell in our press. Unfortunately, it's I'm not saying that they're lying, but there's a lot that gets ignored. And I think that that's unfortunate. Mark, thank you for the call. I don't want to sound like Donald Trump here, but hey, you gotta call it what it is. Denny in Maryland. Hey, Denny, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
It's Donnie.
Donnie, my apologies. What's up, Donnie?
Yeah, no problem. I've been on the hold for a minute, so I've lost some of my thoughts. So give me a second. Number one, you were talking about the Democrats not being on TV. I understand that because I listen to you. I listen to all of progressive radios from morning to evening, and then I watch MSNBC at night. Now, my problem is this. If they can't get on TV, why not buy ads in newspapers? Every Friday, you used to have Bernie Sanders, and now you have Congressman Tom May, I think his name is?
No, Mark Pocan.
Okay. Mark Pocan. Why don't more of these guys come on and use other media efforts to get their message out?
Because that would take money. That would take money, and Mark Pocan does not take money from PACs and big corporations, and so money is very dear for these guys.
Tom, so I can understand. So for them to come on your show would cost who? Them or you?
Neither. I don't charge anybody anything to come on my program. But if they wanted to buy an ad in a newspaper, they would have to pay for it. That's considered advertising.
I understand that. I worked on Hill, and they have a budget for that. But my point is this. If they're not getting on the Sunday morning talk shows, it does not mean that they have to remain silent and have you carry the weight for them, because I know Mark Thompson talked about how he's asked them to come on his show, and they won't. And I'm sure you have. So
who's the them you're talking about?
That's the frustration you're hearing from us Democrats, is that they're not even trying other media outlets to get their information across.
Well, there are some levels of frustration here, and I'm guessing what Mark is talking about is people like Chuck Schumer not being all that enthusiastic about doing progressive media. I think
not only just Chuck Schumer, you got 100, not 100, you got 40 some odd Democratic senators, you got 180 something. I worked on Capitol Hill my whole career there.
Yeah.
And so there's enough people that they can still get their message out some kind of way. And as you said, I do not see them on the talk shows. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But that's not the only way that they can get the message out to us, because right now in any state, any place, the word right now, and you hear this because I listen to your show, you hear this from a lot of callers, we don't feel like they're fighting. Maybe they are, but that we can't see it from other. I'm listening to you.
Well,
I listen to you try to.
This is the media thing, Donnie, and thank you for the call. I mean, I get your point, and believe me, we have a media problem in this regard as much as anything else. Maryland in Berkeley, Michigan. Hey, Maryland, what's up? You got Michigan news for us?
Yes, I do. On Saturday, there was an article in the Detroit Free Press that a mystery group wants 2016 ballots. It's a FOIA request that is being delivered to the clerk offices in where this is a small suburb. Other suburbs have already gotten it. They want the ballots, they want the absentee ballots, they want the envelopes that the ballots were sent in, they want the applications for the absentee ballots, and the request is signed by a first name. And when the company with which that person is affiliated was called. They can't find any information about it.
So you're concerned that something is rotten in Denmark here.
Well, who wants this? Not only, but the timing.
Right.
Here we are. We had in August 7th primary election. There were real serious problems in this county, and maybe in others, that there were not enough ballots printed because they knew it was going to be bigger, but they didn't anticipate how much bigger it was going to be. And, is it happening in other states?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, we'll put it out to our listeners. If anybody knows the answer to Marilyn's question, give us a shout, 202-808-9925. Marilyn.
And call your, check with your clerk, see if anything's happening.
Yeah, find out what's going on. Marilyn, thanks for the heads up on that. We'll keep track of it. I appreciate it. And if you learn anything more, just give us a shout back. Thanks for listening to SiriusXM. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
John McCain's memorial service in Arizona has just concluded. His body's being transported now to Washington, D.C. And welcome back. Richard, watching Free Speech TV on a Roku box in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Hey, Richard, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I have a question from back in the 60s, actually. I have a question from back in the 60s. Do you think that had LBJ run for a second term, they would have won, and had he won, would have ended the war earlier than Nixon did? And since Bobby Kennedy probably would have been assassinated, would he have run and won in 72?
Yeah. The answer to your question is a substantial one. First of all, Lyndon Johnson, he was prosecuting the Vietnam War. And it was enormously unpopular as a result of that. The hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today was just like, ubiquitous. And so the party elders came to Lyndon Johnson and said, you may not run again. He could have legally run again, but they were so certain that he would lose the election that basically they told him to stand down. And he came out with this, in the press saying, I will not run. Even if nominated, I will not accept the nomination of my party. And so Hubert Humphrey became the nominee. Now, in answer to your question about the Vietnam War, Johnson had negotiated peace with both North and South Vietnam as of August of 1968. And it was going to happen in October of 68, and it would have guaranteed that Hubert Humphrey became president. Richard Nixon found out about this, and I'm going to play this out of the 360, Sean. Richard Nixon found out about this and went to the Vietnamese and said, just hold off, don't do the peace deal until after the election. I'll make you rich, I'll give you a better deal. And Lyndon and the CIA intercepted the wires, the communications, and brought it to LBJ. LBJ then called up Everett Dirksen, who was the minority leader in the Senate and had been for 10 years, and had this conversation. This is LBJ and Everett Dirksen.
Here's the latest information we got. The agent says that they just talked to the boss in New Mexico. And that he says that you must hold out. Just hold on until after the election. We know what Chew is saying to them out there. Yeah. We're pretty well informed on both ends. Now, I'm reading their hand, Everett. I don't want to get this in the campaign. That's right. And they oughtn't to be doing this. This is treason. I know.
This is treason. So Richard Nixon committed treason in order to become president of the United States and prolonged the war to the tune of another 20,000 or more dead Americans and another probably 1 million dead Vietnamese. So, there's no doubt in my mind if LBJ could have done his peace deal, Hubert Humphrey would have been president, and Nixon would never have put Rehnquist on the bench. And Rehnquist, of course, was the guy who decided in 2000 to make George W. Bush president. And George W. Bush brought us, a few toxic nominees, too. I don't think we've had a legitimately elected Republican president since Dwight Eisenhower.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's the story, Richard. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for watching us in Ypsilanti, Michigan. It's a story that it's just astonishing to me. If a Democrat, even in the 19th century, if a Democrat had committed treason in order to get elected, everybody in America would know all about it. Everybody thinks they know that John Kennedy, in Chicago, that the Daily Machine stole the election for John Kennedy and therefore made him president. The fact of the matter is, if he had lost Illinois, he still would have been president. A, and B, there's never been any evidence that Mayor Daley ever did anything to help John Kennedy. In fact, they didn't like each other. But, the Republicans promote that, but not this. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. And Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Well, what I'm noticing in local conservative talk radio, which, as everyone knows, is top-down, there's nothing original, is the politicization of, let's say, the ills of society, such as the homeless issue and the opiate epidemic. In fact, conflating the two of those and blaming those on liberal policies. The reason we have homeless opiate problem in the Seattle-King County area is because essentially the liberals are feeding the bears. Or see, we're making it easy to be homeless and opiate addicted, and that they absolutely refuse to acknowledge the statistics about these issues. In fact, one of the catchphrases is, for instance, 83% of the people who are homeless in Seattle-King County are local people, but they say, oh, no, they're coming here, and the catchphrase is, any cop will tell you. Any cop will tell you. Forget the surveys and the statistics. Any cop can tell you. So this is kind of the law enforcement demonization of homeless as if they were the, quote, illegals, and the opiate epidemic is the liberals are feeding the bears, and that's why we have this problem, if you understand what I mean by that phrase, the liberals are feeding the bears. And the solution, and the reason is to gin up as much anger as possible about the ills of society, and cast it under this, what I call a neo-Judeo-Calvinist moralistic mindset. Yeah.
That's absolutely what they're doing. This whole, I was talking yesterday about the myth of conservative and Republican victimhood. These guys are snowflakes, beyond any imagining of snowflakes. They are so fragile. They are so freaked out that, gee, if you help out somebody with some food stamps, that must mean that, or whatever it may be. I'm with you, Paul. Thank you. Calling and rebutting conservative talk radio, but it's a fine thing to do. And I absolutely understand. Olga in Byron, Maine. Hey, Olga, what's on your mind today? Olga, watching Free Speech TV in Byron, Maine? I'm sorry, Olga. Let's try Albert in Los Angeles, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Albert, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. Just want to talk about libertarians.
Okay.
How they get microeconomic theory and macroeconomic theory not so much mixed up, but they can't extrapolate out.
Okay.
I was having a debate with a libertarian, And, I finally got him to concede that there's really only two ways to increase GDP, which is get it from outside of the economy, from another economy, or to print more money, because I finally also got him to concede that resources and money should be finite because, resources are finite.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about tax policy there. But when we got on to how he didn't feel like his tax percentage when paying for fire departments and police departments and things like that should be the same because he was on the flat tax kick. I said, well, if the poor person's house next to you burns down and spreads to your house, what then?
Right. And that's the, in the event of an epidemic, do you really not want to have a national health care system? I mean, which is the variation on that. And if you think it's so important to have all of our houses protected by the fire department, why shouldn't our bodies be equally protected when they're metaphorically on fire with cancer or with disease? Excellent points, Albert. Excellent point. Thank you very much for that. Dan in Orlando, listening on iHeartRadio. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Hey, good afternoon. I'm a first-time caller, long-time listener to you.
Thank you, Dan.
First and foremost, I want to thank you for educating me and everybody that listens to you.
Thanks. We only have about a half a minute here, Dan, so it's got to be quick.
Well, I'm on the Gillum campaign, to be honest with you. Man, I wish I could talk to you about the smear campaign that's going on here, but, I just want to say to all your callers out there, we need some help down here in Florida. We're being outspent. We're outspent in the primary, $90 million to $6 million. And we've already got so many lies, falsehoods, and misrepresentations, along with racism and everything coming into the election down here in Florida, the probably biggest swing state in the country. So we just really need a lot of help. If y'all want to get on AndrewGillum.com and if y'all could phone call for us, or maybe if you could donate a little bit, it would go a long way to help the country and us.
There you go. Dan, I'm pleased to carry that message on your behalf, and thank you for the call and for making it. AndrewGillum.com. Check it out. And thanks so much for being with us. We'll be back, but also it's really important. I mean, as we come into this election, and as in many states, the window is closing to register to vote, it is so important to make sure that your voter registration is up to date. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It takes all of us. That includes you. So get out there and get active. Tag, you're it.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who, pay the bills. They support the program, and we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to ThomHartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have, and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much.